I met Brandon about, I don't know, must be 4 years ago now. He was this remarkable person who had started up a discussion group, an in-person discussion group, I think long before, or he'd restarted it long before anybody had come back from COVID. And he'd really demonstrated a kind of persistence and courage to have community-based discussions of sometimes extremely difficult topics. And that group's like over 12 years now, and we do it mostly every Saturday morning, and it's quite an experience. It's been quite a learning experience for me. Brandon has a depth of insight and a trenchant way of digging into things that I find pretty remarkable and a rare find. And he continues to deepen his knowledge, which we'll see here today. So it's a real pleasure to be here with you, Brandon, and I'm just so pleased that we're doing this again and that we're gonna knife and fork this a bit today as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Marty. Excuse me. Yeah. Yeah, Marty, you are a really inspiring person. You've got breadth of knowledge and wisdom that you've developed over decades. And so I'm still, in the process of learning, and so when you showed up for these in-person events, and we started collaborating and, and then we're involved with these online events as well. And so it's really remarkable the work that you've been doing with local participatory journalism, trying to figure out how to deal with this, give people tools and also build communities in the times of they're increasingly challenging. So I suppose we can get right to it then. And so what I'll probably do is just go ahead and share my screen. One moment. All right, so this is part two of integral sense making for global and national events. And some of you guys joined for part one, and wherein we covered a few things. And I think we're going to start with a recap of that, and then we're going to go on to some new stuff. And so, do you have anything to add while we're on this title screen, Marty? Okay, so as a recap, what we have is the sense making is the process of by which people give meaning to their collective experiences. And mainstream media and social media, we are constantly being bombarded with claims, a large proportion of which are untrue. And we can consider sense making and collective decision making and practical implementation of decisions to be a mutually interdependent triad. So that's the triad is that it's the evaluation of information such as sensory data, truth claims, intuitions, collective decision making, and practical implementation of decisions. So it's not sense making to just on a rock and think and like, oh, I figured it out. Like you actually have to collectively make decisions and actually enact those decisions in order for it to really be the sense making process. And so all aspects of this triad are more complex in our contemporary world, and a person's ability to rationally make sense of news, information, and claims depends on their level of cognitive, emotional, and ego development. So it is important to consider the developmental altitude of each individual and also their peer groups. So we have this problem, public sense making, and that poor public sense making. Many people are doing poor sense making on matters of public concern. And as a result, far too many people in countries that are supposedly democratic, free, and fair are making very poor decisions in their public and private lives. And this is not to be judgmental. We're just looking at, a lot of objective evidence. Although what we're doing here is we don't want to, start with some assumptions. We're just really kind of feeling into this. We're saying here's kind of the background ambient information and understanding that we have. but we're going to do this sense making session. We're going to try to figure this out together. This is participatory with everybody. Okay, so one of the immediate results of poor public decision making in this by the citizenry is that we have very poor political leadership in many democratic countries. And this is exacerbating many existing crises because bad decisions are being made by poor political leaders. And I don't want to mention any names right now, but we'll just leave it at that, I suppose, for now. So this is about worldviews, values, and sense making. So the this is a little bit of an adaptation based on an adaptation of spiral dynamics, which a lot of you guys in the integral community are already familiar with. In this case, we're really just taking, kind of a somewhat collapsed view of the whole thing. And we're not going to focus on, the colors, but you kind of know, a lot of you guys know kind of the, the what amber/blue for traditional and orange for modern, but in this case, we're really focusing more so on the worldviews and the value memes. So, and we're also we want to recognize the integrative level, which is integral, teal/turquoise. So we don't want to get the granular within that so-called second tier. It's not as relevant to what we're doing here. We want to acknowledge that because when you are capable, when people in communities have that capability, they then have the ability to integrate across different values that are, traditional, modern, or postmodern. And that's an important skill to have. And it's an important cultural development that we want to aim to in order to be able to alleviate some of these tensions that we're experiencing in our society. There is a lot of tension and actually a lot of fraying of our sociocultural fabric, which a lot of people take for granted, but it is the sociocultural fabric that provides the possibility for peaceful coexistence with people. Otherwise, there would be, you wouldn't be able to go to the store without, bringing a knife or a gun with you, right? So there's so much that we take for granted in our peaceful coexistence. There's so much dependent on the sociocultural fabric that in turn also has deep connections to the political and economic systems and that stability. And we can see it fraying before our eyes. So I'm not sure if I want to read all of this. A lot of you guys can see it. Maybe I'll just keep it up for a moment, but you can see that each of these four worldview types has a certain way in which people who have that center of gravity are going to evaluate information, collectively make decisions, a certain whatever, if there is a group or organization that, the ambient level of cultural development is at that altitude, there is a certain collective decision making that's happening at that altitude. And then there's a practical implementation that happens. So another thing is that we can recognize that many people who have an altitude, at a certain level, and note that these are upside down. I mean, integrative would be like at a higher altitude, obviously, than the others here. But even if you are at that altitude, there is still a possibility for you to act, at other levels because you have all of that integrated within you. So, I mean, there are many times where people who have a very advanced level of development are going to still act in a, modern, orange or traditional amber way. So we need to keep that in mind. So this is a kind of a caveat to the, what would otherwise be seen as a lot of people think of a growth to goodness, which is actually a fallacy. So growing up is not necessarily making better decisions, but we need to strive to make better decisions and recognizing, a table such as this and those categories can actually help us in that regard. All right. And so we also, one thing that came up in our last discussion is John Vervaeke's 4 Ps of knowing. And so some of you guys might be familiar with this, like I can know how to do something, or I can know some fact, etc. So these all start with P, which is really, makes it easier to remember that. So we can start, I suppose. One probably the easiest one to understand is propositional knowing, because it's like I know something is true. You remember how, last time, for those of you who joined, we talked a lot about truth claims. Um, how do I evaluate claims? There's a lot of claims being made in the news, in your, social media feeds. Um, so are those true? And if they are, then you have that kind of propositional knowing. Um, propositional knowing it's a well evidenced and well argued knowing, a kind of knowing that is closely tied to language and justification. I mean, do you have an example to offer? Maybe I can pass to you, to offer examples for each of these, Marty.
No, I mean, I think if we look at most of the debate we see, even on where there's great writing or where there's in social media, it, basically, if you follow the thread, you can almost always see that it's people arguing some propositional, some rational, logical argument, and their belief systems behind what they believe, what proposition they believe is probably apparent, but it's also just clear they're saying they know this. And in fact, most of our discussions, I mean, science is almost, at least in a beginning way, starts with this propositional knowledge, and kind of our whole rational model is limited to propositional discussion. And that's really important to note as you go on here, Brandon.
Yeah. And so we could also talk about procedural knowing. This is knowing how to do something, maybe muscle memory, or, some sort of skills for accomplishing tasks. So some examples like riding a bike, perhaps. Like I know how to ride a bike. Can you give maybe some another example, Marty?
Yeah, brain surgery.
Yeah, that's a pretty hard one. I mean, I learned to ride a bike when I was 5, and I
I
still
knew
haven't
you.
learned brain surgery. That's kind of hard.
And it's interesting too, because again, it's easy to forget that we live in a time, modernism loves experts, right? The idea of expertise, right? So much is driven by this efficiency expertise model, experts telling us what's real and what's not real. We put an incredibly high value on this procedural knowledge, even if it's not always visible to us, because we love our experts. And to realize it's a way of knowing, right? You can have book knowledge, but the actual experience of doing the procedures, as any ritualistic practice will teach you, that, it changes how you know the thing. And so it's important to center in that and see it as another level of knowing, especially as you go on to the next one.
Yeah, which is perspectival knowing, and this is no knowing that via embodied perception and experience. I'm seeing, I'm experiencing. I know that I have this perspective onto the world, some sort of point of view. Notably, though, it is ever changing. I think as soon as you say, "Oh, I know that in experience, and I can name it and I can say it," you've moved out of perspectival knowing and into propositional knowing. So once you have these mental maps, then that's actually more propositional knowing, because the perspectival knowing is really just that perspective, really just ever shifting and changing based on the experience or perhaps memories. But once you're constructing, like, this has happened there and this happened there, and you're essentially communicating that via some sort of symbolic language, then that's actually more in propositional. So yeah, so what do you think of this, Marty? What kind of examples can you offer?
Well, in a sense, the entire integral map, it kind of sees this perspectival view, which is, kind of important to reference back to. Um, this kind of a sense that, you can, as you're going to do in the next one, you can move on to a pluralistic view of all those perspectives. But if one can't first inhabit their own awareness if I can't inhabit my awareness of the totality of my perspective and everything that informs that, well, that's fairly narrow. So it requires a kind of a growth, right? And we see it in conversation all the time where somebody says, well, I'd really like to hear your perspective, right? And or I don't know if you're hearing my perspective, right? Let me try to explain it again. So there's this mutuality that starts to emerge through that perspectival, through that inhabiting of that deep awareness that, hey, I have a perspective.
Yeah, yeah. And a lot of times you have to use language to get there. So you have to use propositional knowing to get there, but that's not to reduce perspectival knowing to propositional knowing, as some seem to do sometimes, you know. Let me see your perspective is like, okay, I want to get to the point where I have that sort of embodied, uh, felt sense of, you know, of seeing and hearing and feeling as you do, in a certain sense. Like, and that's you know, beyond the mere words or claims that you might be communicating. So this last one here is participatory knowing, which is a little bit difficult to define because it's actually not just something that you know. It's about the relation and the fittedness between the agent and the arena. So that's where it's found, and and this is something that's more involves engagement, co-creation, finding a flow, and it's more inactive. It's more about you know, being embedded in this context and finding that connection, that relation, and it's also developmentally based. So. Now, actually, it is something that isn't reducible to procedures. Like I can know how to navigate my way in a city, but you put me in a different city, maybe I don't know. But if I have some sort of intuition on how to do that, how to fit in, then I already have that developmental capacity to be dropped into a different environment and figure it out. And even though you can't reduce it or you couldn't describe in procedural terms or even in perspectival terms how I did that, it became a part of the self or the ego in a certain sense. So that's why it's really important. And it is ultimately not just definable in terms of a subject. It is a subject object relationship.
Yeah, and I think we're going to do some participatory knowing here soon. So I'll let what follows next as a bit of an explanation in particular of the role that participatory knowing, how we become conscious of experiencing it.
All right. And actually there's one more that's is another P of knowing, actually, which is paradigmatic processes. So that is I'm not sure if we would consider it a distinct form of knowing because it's having paradigms that integrate each of these. So you're participating, you're having a perspective, you're going through some sort of procedures, you're understanding these propositions and evaluating them, and then you're cycling back, or there's some sort of a process, some sort of a paradigm that brings these together. And that is probably the best way to bring about wisdom, um, which John Vervaeke also defines wisdom as a rationality applied onto itself. So we can't use rationality to be more rational, but we can use wisdom to be more rational. And wisdom then in turn should probably involve some sort of paradigmatic process that integrates these four P's of knowing.
And I think that just jump in there on that before we even go into the theory U discussion now. This idea of participating in a paradigm. I mean, it's really important to realize that, when we say agent arena, and we're talking about this phenomenon of how we as agents participate in society, right? If you want to take that as an arena, or the way all of us here are participating, right? Now, I can see you in the video. So our shared experience here allows me to see you. You can see me, you can hear me. And Zoom has done this incredible thing, in its context, for having created a whole bunch of affordances between us, between the environment we're in and what all of us can do together. And it's easy for that to go away, to realize, to not even see Zoom anymore. We've been in here long enough now that maybe in this call, even we don't see Zoom, but that is here. And so one of the other ideas that I think we don't have to spend a lot of time on, but if you're interested in more of this, and at the end, I'll put in some links for more of this stuff, for Vaki's, the 4 Ps, just explaining it further in videos. But I think another key concept when you get to participatory and paradigm is to understand this concept of, to feel into this idea that our environments afford us things. And those affordances are really important to be able to see and understand, because it's easy for them all to become transparent. And then we stop seeing them or appreciating them or knowing how they come about. We can no longer really be in our environment and be fully aware of it. And, maybe you can start to see why I'm emphasizing this, because sense making itself, in my view, depends on being able to feel into those affordances, um, and ask yourself, well, is this action, is this claim, how is that going to affect our complex agent arena environment, to see its dynamics, to see it as a living, breathing thing, and of course, changing. Thanks, Brandon.
Okay. So the you take it away, Marty.
Yeah, and Brandon, you said paradigm, and as we were talking earlier, it's, in some sense, theory U here, which we're going to talk about briefly, but we're going to do it more, is actually a paradigm about how those 4 Ps can come together. And I'm going to spend a minute talking about open mind, open heart, open will. And for those of you who are interested, I'll also put a link to an article I wrote called Open, 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 which may sound silly, but it's kind of how I think about this framework often. That presencing down there at the bottom that you see under open will, and we can see letting go and let come. Those are, maybe words a lot of us have heard here and there, but what is it like to sit in a space where we're deeply presencing and our will is completely open? This is non-trivial, right? It's not like I wake up in the morning and, particularly if I just had a bad dream, I'm going to be confined or constrained by my actual states, what I'm experiencing now. And I'm also going to be constrained by what I can conceptualize, how much complexity I can hold in my mind, and whether I'm even open to things like open heart, this sense of deeper sensing. And then comes this idea where we ask about open mind. And in many ways, back to the 4 Ps, open mind is kind of like propositional, and I'd argue even a lot of procedural not knowing happens there. And it's where most of us live most of the time, right? Now, in this theory U, this beginning of suspending and seeing there at the top of the U on the left-hand side is really about opening our minds. And we're gonna go through the process of how to get to the voice of judgment, the VOJ there on the left. And so this all works together. where we learn how to come as a group and start suspending and seeing. But it's really important to realize you can't not go through propositional knowledge. You cannot go through your expertise, your procedural knowledge. And in fact, you really need to show up with it, right? And yet be ready to suspend it. And sometimes that process wise means just getting it out. Means, well, here's what I think. And it becomes a vulnerable place, right? This process is quite vulnerable because, oh, okay, I'm just going to show up with what I think about this. So for instance, if we were to start discussing a claim that's been made in society, there is an invasion at our southern border. And how did that land in your body? What sort of words came up? Any anger, any bullshit, any, yeah, it's terrible. You know, if I say that, I've already got a slew of stuff that's come to the party. So we could sit around and have a discussion and act like that didn't all just happen. Or we could let it out. And part of seeing is letting it out. So there's vulnerability. You have to have a safe environment. You got to feel like, okay, yeah, I'm willing to say it. I think that's absolute bullshit. But the other thing that can happen is we can't get into censoring and arguing. The first part of this process is to see simply what is. So there's going to be a lot of opinions in this room. There's 25 people on this call. One of them is an AI, by the way, taking notes. And so we can expect a lot of diversity, even if there's probably a tendency to groupthink here, because we're all on an integral call, right? So we're all going to kind of coalesce around something. And I would urge us as we begin the process not to, because after all of that opening and suspending the judgment, being able to see the voices of judgment, right? To really let go of judgment. We're going to move into this kind of sensing or more redirecting into open heart. And what does open heart mean? Well, if I've been heartbroken, it's pretty easy to become cynical. So the voice of cynicism is a powerful barrier to that open heartedness. And that often comes because in this example, if somebody during the open mind part of this says, well, there is an awful lot of immigration and it's a problem, or there's a real tax on our resources at the southern border, there's probably other people in the call who'd want to say, don't you say that, and have reasons that person shouldn't say it. But developmentally, we've got to be at a place to kind of go, yeah, okay, well, all perspectives are valid, at least partially, assuming it's a relatively sincere and partially informed. I'm going to listen. So where we're headed is into listening and learning. So we're trying to move into much more of maybe what Hansi Freinacht, the listening society starts to point to, this kind of sense of we've got to be able to listen to one another better. And that's got to happen in the heart, not in the open mind. Sure, we got to listen to all the noise, but we have to listen with our hearts, which means we have to be vulnerable and we have to be a hell of a lot more open. But why? Why bother with that? Because you can't get to open will any other way. You can't get to participatory knowing, that kind of sense of we're all in this arena together. Let's learn from one another. Unless you can suspend the judgment and the cynicism. But that's non-trivial. It's not like, oh yeah, no, I've suspended my judgment and cynicism, right? Let me get cynical about that statement, right? At least let me get skeptical about that statement. It's not easy to suspend our judgment. It's not easy to suspend our cynicism. So before we start, I should have said that letting go, that open will, the F over there, voice of fear, F for fear. Why fear? Well, as you go through a process of letting go, right, there's openness. Sometimes it can feel a little bit like walking up to the edge of the track on the subway, on the underground. They kind of, I better back up. or on a real cliff, up on the cliff above the ocean, and you realize you've gotten very, very close to the edge, or, oh, natural fear is going to emerge because if you go through open-mindedness and open-heartedness, there is space. And we naturally kind of want to fill that space rather than being able to let things come, to let things crystallize out of a collective wisdom. And that's what we're pointing to here is a process where our collective wisdom begins to emerge. Now, today, as you know, for some of you, if this is the first time you've ever done it, we're probably going to do a little bit of meta-analysis as we go. If we had more time, if we were more practiced, what would be happening here? But I'm also curious to see how much of it just emerges. So voice of judgment, voice of criticism, voice of fear also point to all the blue stuff up top, and then all the time on the bottom. But the opposite of presencing is absencing in this model. How to stay stuck, which is denying, desensing, absing, diluting, aborting. And we all know how much of that we're seeing. And in this paradigm, we'd be saying judgment, cynicism, and fear, they drive us up there into social pathology, which is the top of this graph. And that's why Brandon, I think, correctly called this paradigmatic. So we have an invasion at our southern border. Our aim here is to ask ourselves, do we have an invasion at our southern border? There's a proposition in society. Brandon?
And we recognize that people maybe from different countries here. So
Oh,
if
understood.
you're in Europe, you could consider, is there an invasion, at the southern border of whatever country or the
Or
coming
northern or eastern. Yeah,
coming
you're
from the
right.
Mediterranean Sea, which that some are saying that that's been happening for a while. The reality is that the United States of America is the most like not just powerful, but also like whatever happens in the U.S. Political wise, that's seems to be sucking up the air in terms of the global discussion. The information ecosystem is at the global scale comes a lot from the US. So that's the kind of the context that we're talking about. But whatever country you're in, you can maybe say there's probably domestic politicians who are also saying that there's an invasion, from immigrants. Can say that.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Brandon. And I think, I don't want to go off on a big complex immigration debate because I'm trying to make the claim, you know, there's actually a really serious immigration problem that's hurting our nation, right? Maybe is another way to put it up one level. In the United States, it's the president of the United States saying, we have an invasion on our border. Now, so I'm going to jump into open mind and tell you what comes up for me as I say that. I'm going to try not to go into a diatribe, and I'd ask everybody to do that. Imagine, we're not going to do it, but imagine we're writing it on a whiteboard. So get your bullet point up on the whiteboard and don't censor anybody. And please don't censor yourself. For me, my big thing that comes up, what comes up in my mind and also in my body and fear, and oh my God, is this a precursor to the president of the United States creating his own domestic police force? Right? And yes, you have an invasion of stupidity at your southern border. The thing is that, that scares me. So in this process, I'm just putting it out there. This feels like somebody trying to start their own police force. Sure, it's an immigration problem, but you know what? It's actually just all the theater of the absurd in order to get a, a physical police force the president of the United States can control personally. So jump in. If you want to be on the video, if you don't, turn your
And
camera off.
and what Marty was just saying there was that's an example of like we want to start with open mind, but we also want to let out like what we're thinking, you know.
Yeah, and feeling.
So whatever you're thinking and feeling, even if it I guess maybe is not quite politically correct, feel free to mention, just drop it in the chat. That's part of this process.
Hi there. Immigration is always used as a scapegoat, so it's a scapegoat issue.
La migra. Mm, yes, it's la migra.
Yeah, you can feel free to verbally state it as well. If you guys want to come off chat and just say something, we also want to, try to capture these ideas in the chat.
Yeah, pain and fear in my body. Sadness.
Well, living in Vancouver, Canada, one of the things that is happening is that this fear of immigrants is being spread into Canada, and so now our right-wing party, called the Conservative Party, is embracing this notion that Canada has way too many immigrants, and there's a whole bunch of illegal immigrants that need to be kicked out. So it's just riding on the coattails of what's going on in the States. It's a bit of a virus, this whole right-wing agenda.
Mhm. I think the comment here, I hear the same fear of belief being expressed by the other side. So I'm slowly trying to sense how this is happening. I really want to appreciate that. I'm trying to sense how this is happening, and I'd love to hear more from others. How is this happening? Because I'll throw in something else. The United States, and at least in the nation I'm in, we do process an incredible number of immigrants, right? It's not like there aren't an incredible number of immigrants coming to the United States. There's a huge flow.
Can I
Is
add to my point?
Yeah, keep going.
Okay. So, um, what I've heard is that the 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 same fears being expressed by the other side is that those who are coming in are part of a new police force for that side. So it's like almost word for word. I hear like this example, and I hear it in many examples, like exactly what we think is, or this group thinks is happening. The other group they think is happening by what this group is doing. So it's very weird what's happening right now.
Can I jump in on
Hi,
that?
I can speak to the other side a little bit. Is why why are the Western governments conspiring to build infrastructures to bring so many immigrants into our countries, like transportation networks and recruiting and NGOs and recruiting? Why is that being done to the extent that it's being done?
We also have a voice that, perspective. That's the there immigrants are threatening incomes of some people. That there are more immigrants come in, that essentially waters down the labor pool. And you know, and these are some of these are quite valid, like in terms of okay, I mean, we can in some cases look at some extreme positions that are taken, and you know, use that to try to shut down the debate. Some people do that, I think, on both sides. On, you know, on the far left, on the far right, they'll say, "Oh, those ones, you know, they just want open borders, you know, and we'll all have this global kumbaya with no borders." And then, you know, you do see on the far left side, like, oh, they want to just kick out anybody who isn't, you know, white person, even if you were born in the US and your parents were born here, they don't want you here at all. So, I mean, you have some extreme positions, but then somewhere in the middle of all this, you actually do have some economic realities that, you know, need to be addressed. Like, is it realistic to think that we could, you know, have people go into whatever region of the world, whatever country with no borders? You know, how would that happen? It would like probably collapse the economy of the country if everyone comes in all at the same time. And for many of these people, even if they're coming from a dangerous place, you would think there's a way to rebuild that country. Like Europe, gosh, that was a war zone, right? 1945. Who wanted to be in Europe? What is it now? Like, you know, like maybe that could happen in places like Syria, some of the very dangerous places in Latin America. You would think like maybe they have a future. Maybe a lot of the people who are from there should stay to help rebuild the country. So those are perspectives, you know, and we don't want to look at extreme views of, you know, in one direction or another, and there isn't just one dimension. There isn't just left and right. There are a lot of different other dimensions, but we don't want to look at any kind of extreme views to discredit an entire, you know, left of center or right of center or other kinds of views. So we want to avoid that kind of pitfall as well.
Yeah, and I just want to jump in because we're going to curtail this because we, of course, if we were doing this together, we'd probably do this for at least an hour. Because there's a lot of voices who haven't spoken. I can't see everybody. We're not in the same room. So, you know, if I were facilitating in a physical space, of course, I'd be trying to draw out the people who've been quiet. So let me do that virtually with you and encourage you because we're going to have to shut this down fairly soon. If I could just get 10 more, do I hear 10 more statements? What's coming up for you? Don't be afraid to be out there, right? What comes to your mind?
Well, if you don't mind me talking again, I just think that people are massively confused and put out of place by the rapidly changing techno-economic situation, and that's happening worldwide. And so people feel that their foundations are falling away, and they're seeking something to hold on to. So they think that somehow resurrecting the past is somehow going to bring a source of comfort and stability to their otherwise increasingly chaotic lives.
Come on, don't be afraid. Jump in there.
So what comes to my mind is this like tremendous like maelstrom of different competing perspectives of people on different sides, and even like uncertainty about like this theory U technology, which I love and have used a lot. Like, is this the solution? And it's just there's just so much, you know. So at the level of mind, just although it's a feeling, really pain uh, of all these competing perspectives that seem really hard to put together, and sadness about this situation that we're in with all these things fighting each other, and just wondering how we're going to get through it.
If you don't mind me saying, this is the first time I've sat in a meeting with an AI bot, and I don't know how that AI bot is programmed. Maybe it's a malicious bot, and
Yes.
it's going to take everything that I say and distort it, or cancel me all completely. I have no idea. So this is just an example of the technological and social changes that we are all facing at an increasingly dramatic rate.
And just point of order, just to let you know, the transcript from the AI bot is like me taking notes. I don't use it as it's written. I actually go through a process with it. That's my intelligence process. So, because I don't trust the AI either. So, unfortunately, anything that gets produced is also going to have my bias all over it. But there you are. I will try to be as unbiased as possible.
I wasn't claiming that there was
No, no, no. I just want to be clear for other people because when you bring that up, it's a good point.
Yeah, I'm just concerned about how AI is going to evolve rapidly in the future. Right now, it's rather innocuous compared to what it might be.
Yeah. Okay, so last call for open mind.
Okay, how's this? The situation with immigration in the US is complicated, many leveled, with many moving parts. And in a period of rapid, turbulent change, it is a convenient target for political figures who are looking for simplistic answers to get people in their camp. It's a scapegoat.
Yeah.
The
Well said. Anybody else? One last one? Come on, you can do it. So when I've led this in different spaces, and it's always easier with when you're in a physical space. Um, we really hang on for long periods of great silence. Might spend 5 or 10 minutes just waiting for something else to come to mind. And it's what's interesting is to see how hard it is for people. Our drive for effectiveness and efficiency, the sort of modern performative energy just takes over. Maybe what I'm saying doesn't make any sense, so I shouldn't speak up. Or I've spoken, and even though I feel really strongly, I'm not going to speak again. Or. But having a really open environment, letting an open mind actually happen. Forget theory. You just ask yourself, what paradigm do you want to live in? I would argue that open mind, understanding the voice of judgment, understanding how many perspectives there are here, and how much emotion's on the table, and how much confusion and how much complexity. So let me shift. I mean, normally we'd spend just to talk about process, since I'm trying to be procedural as well. We normally spend more time, and I would actually, if this was all over whiteboards, I'd be circling things. This is my method. I'd be circling things that are alike, that could be grouped, and try to look structurally at all the groups and the things that have come up that kind of feel like they're related. And then as a group, we'd start drawing lines between those and making comments. And we'd actually get quite a complex graph, right? But that's another 20-minute process or sometimes 30-minute process. Because as you start doing that, again, just sitting with open mind, suddenly the entire topography starts to become much clearer. And somehow in that topography, things jump out for you, right? Beyond your mind. And so one of the ways I expedite this process for these purposes, almost for demonstration purposes, but it often works with many groups, is to just ask the next question beyond moving toward sensing, redirecting our attention away from the maelstrom, which I really love the use of that word, toward the heart. So the question I often ask is, why do you care so much? Why is this important to you? Now we're getting more vulnerable. Vulnerability warning, right? Because now I got to start speaking my heart, right? Yeah. USA is my home country. I care about my country. I feel pain when I imagine those images from the last time when people were being locked in little cages. I feel sad when I think about transition centers being built. It breaks my heart.
And so I just offered a way to get the ball rolling on this. We want to invite you guys to also add in the chat or speak verbally about why you care. You know, there's a lot of we started, you know, with this open mind and we were having these statements. But why is it that we care? What are we feeling? What, you know, what is this emotional sense and what is really driving it in terms of our values?
Well, I have a ready to jump in on this. This is my number one issue. My grandparents were immigrants from Central Europe. They were discriminated against when they got here. I know what they went through so that my parents could have a better life, so that I could have the life that I have. And this, as a historian, I'm aware that this issue has arisen with every wave of immigrants in the country, all the way back to the Germans who came in the 1740s. The same prejudices and statements were getting. This hurts me. I feel pain, um, indignation, and a certain exasperation. Do we have to keep going around the same mulberry bush over and over again? Pain, exasperation, and yeah, urgency.
I care because it hurts me to see people of power use it to hurt people with less power, to use the power that way, and to break up families, to rip children away from their mother and not ever have a way of returning them is incredibly cruel and causes unrepairable long-term damage to human beings.
Yes, for me, following up on what Wheaton just said, there's, this attack on the most vulnerable is the easy thing to do, but it's just a precursor for further attacks on going more and more mainstream, and that just makes me angry. That this is almost like this is a fight. This is like the first, battle of a war, and it's got to be won, or else they're going to just get the next most vulnerable victim, and they're going to do something to them, and it just keeps on rising. And you just look at what happened in Nazi Germany. It wasn't just Jews; it was communists, gays, anyone who wasn't somehow a perfect human being in the eyes of an idealized Aryan race. And so I am just shocked that this is actually occurring, and I really fear how it may continue to roll out.
I care because I feel that as long as we continue to see the moral corruption is in the other, we're actually going to create everything everyone here is describing. Like, I don't see a way we're going to avoid it or address it. It's actually unfolding and going to continue, and it doesn't matter which president or which side enacts it. Sometimes I feel a bit hopeless, helpless too. Yeah.
I feel something maybe a bit similar to what Tara was saying. Like I hear what people are saying about power and the vulnerable, and in my community and even in my family are a lot of those vulnerable people. And at the same time, like I'm almost in tears right now for the pain of the powerful. Like what there is a pain under that. And somebody said, why do we keep going round? Well, I think we keep going round because we don't try to meet the pain of both sides. And then and I care about that because I don't know, for my community, for the planet, for humankind, that seems to me to be where the hope is, if we can go beyond doing that.
So to act like a bit of an accelerator here, when I hear everyone saying that, I want to ask the question, something like, I hear people saying they want to live in a more peaceful and generative society. Is that what I'm hearing? How's that land?
Well, I would mean,
True but
I would say from
incomplete.
Yeah, go ahead
Peaceful,
and add to it.
yeah, yeah. What did you say? Generative
Peaceful and generative.
peaceful, generative, and just caring. I think caring is in there. That's the caring is the piece I wanted to add. Thanks.
So I think my vision's a little more short term. Sure, I would put everything that Karen said, out there in the future as a desire, but there's a desire to meet this present situation in a way that can birth that. And I don't know. There's pain and sadness about our current apparent inability to do that as a species. So the desire for the peaceful and the generative, but before that, a desire to meet the current sort of apocalyptic strands in a way that gives birth to that.
How's that landing for other people? Honesty about the moral corruptions in our personal, group, collective, human heart and soul. So let me play naive. I'm sorry, why is that important? There's a value there. So I'd say to the group, not just to you, Tara, but I'd say to the whole group, you know, why do we need this? Why do we desire this? Why is it this honesty about our own moral corruption. Why does it matter?
Well, I think it matters because we're living in a world that has so many wicked problems. Immigration is just one of several, and we are all participants in helping many of those problems, like climate change. Um, you know, none of us in some way is doing nearly what we might be able to do to combat, to reduce carbon in our lives, as an example. So there's like a moral conundrum there, but the moral conundrums just keep on flowing out. Eating meat, not raising a hand to help Palestinians, not doing anything in Sudan or the Congo or Ukraine. And so I think we feel that we're all morally culpable at some level in our lives.
So as we're getting on, can someone else kind of jump in with a sense of how this is summing up? Because the word that I haven't introduced yet, that I'll introduce now, is I hope you're getting a taste for what open heart is, what overcoming that voice of cynicism is we're really talking about finding our common intention. Like we're here caring. But the hard part is to get out of the maelstrom and try to feel into what that greatest common good is, what that deep mutual intention is. It's non-trivial to get there, and we often avoid it. But the funny thing is that until we have it and we're conscious of it, it's very difficult to refer back to it because, well, we never made note of it in the first place. Right? So there's no shared vision. We're not coming from a shared place of wisdom because our hearts haven't been together enough to find that. And we won't get there today. If I were running this in a community group, I might say this might be 6 sessions to get here again. With this issue, I mean, with, because this is painful. And I think part of what I'm trying to point to is getting to mutual intention, getting to greatest common good is in and of itself the beginning of a participatory process, a participatory knowing, because I need more interaction with everybody here in order to understand this better, because I don't. So I'm opening to a more collective process. But I also know that I need the skills to do that. I need the capabilities. I can't just study it on a chart. I got to know how to do that here with you. We need to know how to do that here together. And if we can't open our hearts and express that deepest mutual intention, and I played in the chat with intentionally, as I wrote the notes, taking things I was hearing people say and trying to move toward that. Well, what's your real intention here? What am I hearing your heart say? What's your deepest intention? You love the world. You love people. Yeah, you want justice. You want peace. You want to get through this complexity and get to a place where we can actually work together and come up with good solutions. And then I ask the question, why? And that's a longer discussion, but I'd say, because that's what we do. We're human. We didn't get to 8 billion people on Earth without doing this, right? On the positive side, this is actually what we've done the opposite, but we actually do this. The grand narrative that moves us forward through different epochs, right? We develop those. It seems to be what we humans are capable of doing. And to me, that's my heart, that I know that about us. So I don't despair, because what I see is a capability issue. Doing this kind of work, whatever paradigm you want to use, but doing this kind of work is actually where we begin. And that's what I'm actively trying to do. So that's why I'm here in this seminar today. Why do I care? It's this work of us working together to get to crystallizing, and from crystallizing, find those things that we can enact together. So I want to brainstorm that very briefly, because we've got a few more minutes before we sum up and get some feedback. But people talked about these deeper intentions. And so I'm just curious, does any spark come up for you about something we could do? Like if we got together for 3 or 4 days and wanted to do something about this, what like little experiment could we run to see if we can understand whatever the quote immigration problem is in our nation? How could we understand it better? Like something concrete. I'm talking about a prototype, which is, if you look at the U, when you come up out of the bottom of the U, it's about getting to action, but not getting to, I'd like to teach the world to sing. Right? No, like, okay, I live in California. I know some people down in San Diego, and they're trying to do this. And, no one's ever done that before. Is that an experiment we could run to see if it makes the situation better? Do I need to create a channel on Blue Sky? Very, really simple stuff at some level. And what I'm trying to emphasize here in the methodology is to recognize that we don't sit at the bottom of the queue forever and go, oh, we all presence together. At some point, that collective wisdom starts to point toward things, but not in a way of, I know the grand vision, but in a respectful way that knows we're in a complex system, and that complex systems don't change linearly. The definition of a complex system is almost whatever you do will produce unpredictable results. So how do I live knowing that the actions I take will participate in greater unpredictability too? So how do I constantly reassess, come back down to the bottom of the U, find the next crystallizing, the next prototyping, this kind of agile flex flow, very integrative, right? Very much looking at that integration of the perspectives. We need procedures, right? We need pre-modern, we need modern, we need postmodern. Those different perspectives are weaving together right now. And what's the most important to do now? Or if you took Plato and said, if wisdom is choosing between all the possible virtues right now and knowing what's most important, right? Because you can't choose all the virtues equally. I don't always want to tell you that your tie looks really terrible. I want to be in relationship to you too, or that new haircut of yours is pathetic. There's nothing to be gained by that. Unless I'm close enough to you to say, hey, could we get back to the barbershop and know I've got a solution for you? That trading off of the values is a complex process. And then when we try to do that together. So with that energy, I just want to say, just one idea. What little thing in your country, could be any country in the world, to actually participate in understanding this problem better, or possibly maybe make it a little bit better or move toward a solution, to even know if that's the direction of travel?
Well, maybe let me start by wishing everyone a Gong Hei Fa Choi, because it is Chinese New Year, which started yesterday. And so one of the things that I could do, I know that there's a Chinese New Year's parade this weekend down in Chinatown in Vancouver, and I could go down there and simply participate in the parade to show, my support for, a immigrant community. a subset, and we could all do that in our communities, because there's all kinds of native festivals and events that occur. And so maybe just showing up helps to show people that you care.
Okay. Something that I do that maybe could be incorporated with a group if we had the time is I will watch the media and gather information from each meme and value set the best I can so I can understand their perspectives. And I try not to watch commentators, but people that are actually in the trenches doing the work, either reporting or saying what their experience is around a given issue so that I can form an opinion and then try to integrate that within myself. So, I mean, just an example, rather than listening to someone comment, I'll pick a name, Elon Musk, I'll listen to him directly and see what he says. Or someone traveling down to Panama to the Darien Gap and reporting on what's going on there and showing it would be examples of what I try to do. And then by gathering the information and holding collectively what a group would glean, then maybe we could find more of a what so to form a consensus about how we be.
Anybody else got a wild and crazy idea we could try?
Yes. So I'm interested in taking one idea, like even this immigration one we did today. And as I watch the chat, I feel like we've got a big spectrum here, and that what that
Yeah.
represents the whole group. So I would love to participate and be part of, like, going through the whole circle here, the theory U plus integral. And personally, I find just I see the limitations of some of these maps, and I'm interested in us taking the time and the heart and the courage to go there with each other. So I think that's what I'm looking for, is where's a group that and I see the ranges here. Now, do we have the skills and the commitment to, like, go through this whole thing ourselves? And maybe we pretend we are the government leaders or of the world or just one country, and go through the whole thing and see where we land, if we even can land somewhere through this process.
Yeah, I'm interested in that. I would add one thing that I've done before, hasn't worked out that well for me personally, in a theory U setting, is to role play some of the positions that aren't represented here. So in the group. So yeah, particularly this, I think what's being held here as narcissistic, angry, power hungry, but to play that from in my possibly narcissistic self-story, a feeling connection with the pain of that group, so that is brought in. So that would interest me.
That's really interesting, and I think that is an even more advanced. There's even more advanced, practices that seem to, I think, as I understand it, coming from the world of Tantra. And I'm not sure. Do you have experience with that sort of thing, like role playing, or like that which you fear, that which you find other, or that which is, socially taboo to like embody that as a way of integrating that polarity. Do you have experience with that,
Yeah.
Marty?
Oh, so I thought you were
Either,
asking me.
yeah,
Yeah,
Nicholas, go ahead.
yeah. So actually, the particular experience I'm thinking of was a social presencing theatre where we were doing the world economy, and I role played sort of the poor, marginalized, angry. And that was so I was playing that, but it helps to integrate it in oneself, but also to presence it to other people, maybe with the feeling tone, cognitive tone, all of those inner aspects that are being taken to be one way. You know, I mean, I don't want to scapegoat this group, but it's okay for us to be angry at the powerful, red, whatever. Their anger and their hurt is not valid. So to bring that in as being valid, and then to take the whole melting pot of anger and pain and see what the group can do with that.
Well, one of the things I like about Otto Scharmer's language, and where a lot of this got born, you mentioned social presencing theater. I had just put it in the chat as soon as you started talking about role playing. I participated in a number, and yeah, it can be quite remarkable, particularly when everybody involved actually has skin in the game, like is directly affected by the issue that's being discussed. You know, like the water in our community is polluted. You know, um, those make for very interesting social presencing theaters. Sometimes it can get a bit abstract if we're like in the case you're saying, picking world peace. You know. What I wanted to point out, though, and this starts to edge into a lot of other philosophical trends as well, that and definitely trends back to integral. Um, there's this part of the whole idea of presencing and prototyping is sensing into what wants to be born, right? What is waiting to be born? So that this sense of possibility, this generativity of us together, that we could actually create something new, that it's not just about fixing the old or fighting the old, or it's the idea that, is there anything that wants to emerge? And yeah, prototype becomes a tool, right? Burn down the White House. Um, well, that's an experiment we could run and then see how that works, you see? So that's what, trying to stay open. Okay, let's put that on the board. But I would welcome that as, yeah, because I hear that energy, right? So this process, what's difficult for hardcore rational types, and let's face it, anybody who's coming from an integral background or any place we advertise this, whether you like it or not, you hang around with people who are way too much in their heads, as I do. There's a reality that we can really overthink this and imagine we have to together, that our collective process is one of coming up with the grand scheme, which becomes very self-defeating. What I like about Theory U and what I like about methods of knowing, and particularly participatory knowing, is to realize that we don't know and that we constantly don't know, because what we're dealing with has complex emergence as its almost primary property. It's filled with paradox. It's filled with surprises. But, cognito ergo sum, lives, right? I believe, because I'm thinking of all this, it's got something to do with reality. But reality is constantly emergent. So what are our social processes where this kind of interactivity can go on all the time with opinions we don't like, with a sense of something wants to be born, a referential to something that's actually a heck of a lot more interesting and complex than my little mind. This ground of being, or whatever you want to call it, and since there's lots of integral folks, we know that the integral framework sooner or later starts edging into spirituality, and there's all the discussions around spirituality, and heaven forbid we should have that discussion. But what is the source of this innovation? What's the source of what is emerging? This sense that we need to enact something. There's a good idea to enact this now. To feel it, that's what presencing's about, is acknowledgement of that source. And today, a group like us isn't going to get there. And that's the difficulty. Because the investment we have to put into what I will call embodied relationality, which you can even do on Zoom, but the effort, and some people pointing to this, just looking at the time, and I'll leave it there because that embodied relationality takes time in and of itself. And by the way, building prototypes is a good way to develop it, right? Like when a community gets together to build a barn, everybody changes through the process, particularly if they're conscious of the opportunity to change. And I think what I'm advocating for here, and what Brandon and I have been talking about sense making, this is a paradigm shift. We're talking about new ways of making sense together. Because the old way of making sense sure as hell ain't working. Okay, I'm going to shut up now. Brandon, you want to jump in, or do other people want to jump in?
Well, I'll let other people jump in if they'd like.
With the immigration problem, and ICE, the Immigration Customs Enforcement, they're rounding up immigrants, and then why don't they just vet them and just they could let them in before people who are applying to come in, and we can get the terrorists, the drug dealers, and the sex traffickers out, and we could vet the people who actually want to contribute to society.
And that actually, for me, it gets to one of the, kind of similar like connection points. Now, there's a whole like, as we mentioned in the last discussion, about how there is a whole like sea or information ecosystem of connection across these any claim or any consideration you have. So if we're talking about, immigration at the border, we're also talking about, okay, who is allowed to be here? And one of the things that came up recently was, this birthright citizenship and the subject to the jurisdiction. So, but that when we say that someone is subject to the jurisdiction, that means that the laws apply to them, whether they're legally here or not. You break the law, you definitely are not allowed to be here. But then there's a pathway, perhaps. Many people, in fact, in the chat here have said that there could be some sort of pathway to citizenship for those who are not breaking or abiding by the law. And so I think that's what you were saying there, or something close to that. So these are considerations about, like, how do we protect ourselves? How do we protect our communities? And how do we also look at, act with compassion? How do we also try to act in a way that is economically viable? I think, Arthur, maybe you were kind of getting at something like that. Like, okay, we need to look at, just practical matters like, okay, we can't really tolerate violence, and many, there's a possibility that some of these immigrants are in fact, violent, but those who are not, maybe they should be given pathways to citizenship.
In addition to what Brandon just said, those who come for seasonal work, like in the farms, need a legal pathway to come do the work and do it legally under the jurisdiction of the U.S. I think the statistic is 42% of farm workers are here illegally. We couldn't get our produce grown into market without them. There needs to be some legal way with the policies in place for these people to come and do their work under the legal jurisdiction of the United States. I'll add that to what Brandon said.
Yeah, and I try to emphasize again, just to try to finish off on theory U, is what we would do with that would be to ask ourselves, is there an experiment we can run to help that idea along? Is that wanting to be born? And if so, what's the next little step to push in the direction to develop momentum in a little tiny way? Because, and that's for us as a group, right? We'd be doing that as a group and we'd be saying, okay, let's do that. We'd try that as an experiment, a prototype, and that might lead us to another level of solution.
What if there was a way to show like collective action that brings to light that these immigrants are, quite a number of them. I mean, like they're following the law. Like we actually can make that public. And also that would not only highlight that these people are many of these people are law-abiding citizens, but also it should actually uh, work in this other domain of like what's going on with the Constitution. A lot of people are, some people are trying to interpret the Constitution to say, that birthright citizenship doesn't apply unless you were subject to the jurisdiction of the US. But like that's what the word jurisdiction means, is like that the law applies to you. So you would only not be subject to the jurisdiction if you had like immunity, so that would, I think, maybe serve both purposes in this attempt to reinterpret the Constitution, and also the attempt to demonize those who are, here illegally just across the board, like to show, like have some sort of public information showing that many of these people are in fact law-abiding citizens. Now, it would also, I suppose, bring to give more visibility into who they are, which a lot of them don't want to be found, but maybe that would do something to sway public opinion to their side. I don't know. That's just a suggestion, just throwing it out there.
Well, I guess are we coming to the end of our hour and a half here, Brandon?
Yes, we are. Although I'm not sure if we suggested just 90 minutes, but yeah, I suppose we're also open if anybody else has any additional like concrete solutions. Just anything to like what can we do? If anybody has any additional suggestions?
I'm not sure how concrete what I'm feeling is, but it carries on from what you were suggesting, Brandon, to make these human beings more human. Uh, the 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 Nazis were able to kill so many people because they turned them into non-humans. The Jim Crow is equally as instructive as Nazi Germany. In America, we made laws so that we could be inhuman to blacks, and we're making laws now that we can be inhuman to immigrants. And somehow, spiritually or universally, I believe we have to see these people as human beings, as valuable as we are. The exact same God that made us made them, and we're no better. And how we make each other human, and including the Americans that are scared to death that they're losing their jobs. That's real too. But how do we make it human? Maybe by talking to each other, maybe by being more publicized instead of the girl that got burned tragically. Publicize a lot of people that are being helped by immigrants. We got to make them human. To me.
Well, I have to say that really resonates with me for, the sort of the important reason that for me anyway, I've got to the point where which is why we're doing sense making here. Ben, you might want to jump in on this too, is that the breakdown in all the ways we used to get and process information and the maelstrom of all the digital media that comes at us has actually created a situation that, from my perspective, says, well, everything we used to do to make sense together, even if we got it wrong, but we got to the point where we believed we were making sense together when we made decisions together. Most of that's broken down, like, the old English expression about the fourth estate, the idea that journalism, the media being the fourth arm of government, right? Well, my own view on that is if we're still carrying that around, we're delusional because of the very nature of digital media, even the large media empires, the concentration of media, how quickly we've gone from 50 media companies to three, all of those things make the idea that we're still living in a sensible information environment very difficult to defend. An idea that instead we're living in an environment where the opposite's true, but most people I see are still clutching, grasping at the existing system to try to get to make sense from it. And I don't think we can.
Mm.
Whereas I'm moving more in the direction of saying, well, what are the alternatives? So I like the term knowledge activism to realize that a lot of the activism today is just making sense. Like the more people can get together and at least come to some sensible perspective through these kinds of processes, that's a kind of activism right now because it's pretty chaotic otherwise.
Yeah, and that gets to actually what we were planning on talking about in part 3, probably next month, about the news and media and different paradigms for how the information ecosystem has worked and the changes in the paradigms based on changing technology and changing media habits and the effects this has had on the sociocultural fabric and on our political system. So that'll be what we'll be talking about next time.
May I ask a question or a suggestion based on what Marty just said?
Mhm.
Um, yes, I like that the systems are breaking down, and I see that. I think that maybe it was Nicholas who said like the systems are breaking down and for a reason. So if like let's give that value, it's happening for a reason. And then what I see from our conversation too is we could even take, like, let's say there's the two sides in the US, and I suspect they're actually the same themes of why the system's breaking down. Like they would, it might be the same four words they would use, like freedom, and you're taking away the freedom. No, it's you. So that's what I see is happening. Like it is breaking down, and we're not arguing that, but we're pointing at the other group saying it. But then actually, what they're arguing for even has the same language. And so, how do we take all the things you're offering and get to the next level?
Yeah, that reminds me of this it's called the glass bead game, which involves some brainstorming about what words mean and that different perspectives on it. And then there's a way of when you're presencing that, like you can look at freedom. What does freedom mean? And everybody gets a little bit of a chance to talk about that. And then you can kind of, consider these perspectives that have been aired and like maybe freedom is all of those things somehow. So that's another idea for what we could maybe perhaps even do at a future event.
Mm. I actually think it's interesting. I've been following Integral for a long time. And although I know there's an incredible number of coaches, there's an incredible number of activity, actual methodologies like Theory U and others um, are still kind of way out on the edge, right? There's the mainstream methodology, either corporate or in schools or anywhere else, is still pretty conventional. pretty modern in its focus, pretty performatively focused rather than human process focused or collective wisdom pointing to something greater than individual performative excellence, you know. That's like what our system likes to do for all of us. And I think that in and of itself is interesting. You know, methods for groups of people to move into action together that aren't the conventional way we perceive that. And I think part of the reason for that is, well, it requires the development of skills. In other words, it requires change. Like we have to start changing the way we make sense together. And we have to learn the skills to do that because it isn't coming naturally. Right. And so it's just interesting to go there for a while and to be for me to I've had to go into the space of realizing, oh, okay, yeah, there's quite a gap there. So what if we turned our attention to the gap? You know, how would we get over that? And for me, yeah, go ahead. Somebody coming in there, or did I miss that?
I just said, wow, at the magnitude of that idea. It's gorgeous and it's fundamental and how it's I hadn't thought of it attacking this problem at that level, at that magnitude.
Yeah, it feels kind of ground floor, doesn't it?
Yes.
Well, that'll be interesting. The practice itself, and Brandon's pointed to part 3 of this, I think, is what's forming is this idea of really playing with that question, but playing in a pragmatic way, not in an abstract way. You know, like, well, what is emerging? How are people making sense in different ways? What are the networks of that? And I'm hoping even people will bring their own knowledge and experience. Um, as William pointed out, you know, we live in a weird time where we now have AI, right? And I don't know if like, is anybody familiar with a tool like Bloomfire? Ever heard of Bloomfire? Um, you know, what's happening now is corporations, of course, have got tools that are helping groups of people put their knowledge together and create effectively knowledge bases or knowledge graphs and using AI to help that. And, you know, there's an incredible amount happening about the way people get together and make sense of things. And we can like them or dislike them, but it's really interesting to stop and go, well, what is happening? Anybody got any final comments they want to throw in? Well, I hope everybody's enjoyed themselves today. I must admit, in an hour and a half, I'm proud to say we haven't lost that many people, which I hope we did something right. So thank you for being here today. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you for pulling this together, both of you. We're chewing into something very important here. This is valuable. I appreciate the effort, everybody who's attending.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
want to say the same thing. Just thank you very much for taking all our little individual lives and pulling us together in such a honest way.
Mm.
Thank everybody who joined us here. And I do appreciate the collective sense making that we have been engaged in. And please do contact me. It's Brandon at enlightenedworldview.com. If you want to get involved with some of the stuff that we are working on. Also localsensenews.com. And I think Marty, you can offer your email address if you'd like. or, I don't know if you're concerned about getting too much spam, you don't have to mention it verbally if you don't want.
Well, I'd also encourage people, if you want to play more in this space, I hope to keep writing about it, which is reinventing us, all one word, reinventing US on Substack. So
All right. I think we'll bring it to a close here.